Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 25th of June 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to another UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, John Hurst.
Good morning.
How are you, John?
Fine, thank you.
Good. Well, John's going to be giving us an update in a few minutes about what he's been doing with regard to courts and challenging the fraudulent international banks. And we're going to be putting that into context with having a look at what is actually going on in Britain at the moment. Excuse me, to celebrate quite an in-depth look at British politics today, I've put on my special Westminster rat tie. Well, Nick Green is behind the technical desk, and we hope we're going to have a more stable technical day than we did yesterday. Weather, what's the weather been in?
Very, very bright. Yeah, 25 degrees I understand today.
In Wales?
Yeah, when we set off, yeah, it was on the way, yeah.
Okay, so the weather in Wales has been pretty good. I think it's been quite reasonable over in Northern Ireland. It's good here in Plymouth today. We've got sun in Rhondda, so there you are, good across the country. Well, let's just have a look at this extraordinary story. We had to tweet it out because potentially, my goodness, we're in for a dangerous time. And this was initially sent to us with the caveat, more or less, that it was Belgium about to declare war on Russia. Where is the information? UK Column website. We need to look at the tweet box here and flash report. Let's bring it on screen. World War III as Belgian military mobilises v Russia. Well, were we joking? Well, of course we weren't. And thank you very much for the gentleman overseas that picked up this report in what is effectively the Flemish equivalent of the Metro. And it was a very, very interesting report saying how Belgium was mobilising men to intervene in Russia. Well, let's put that over in English so we can have a look. It said Brussels Defence Minister Steven van der Put, the new Flemish alliance, is seeking to supply troops, helicopters and F-16s for a rapid intervention force on the eastern borders of NATO. Next year, the Belgian military will be participating in the NATO Rapid Reaction Force. The 4,000 to 5,000 man strong unit is supposed to be on the spot within 48 hours to head off a foreign threat, in this case a Russian threat. What this means in concrete terms is that Belgium will be obliged to keep more than 1,500 troops on standby for months, reports to Standard. The government has yet to give its approval. So this is fascinating stuff. We've obviously seen David Cameron continuing to ramp up the rhetoric, blaming President Putin and Russia for every crime we're seeing in the world at the moment. And of course, the inference is that NATO is to be expanded eastward right onto the Russian border in order to keep this terrible man, Mr. Putin, in check. Remember at the same time, and we'll be commenting on this further, that it's the same David Cameron that is absolutely slashing Britain's armed forces to the bone while he ramps up the rhetoric for war. There can only be one result from that, and that is, of course, that it will ultimately be American servicemen and women who will take the brunt of any deaths or casualties. So if you're listening from the States and you wonder why American armed forces are simply being used as the playthings of David Cameron, perhaps you might like to email the British Prime Minister to ask him. It's quite incredible, isn't it, that we're seeing this
I don't know
aggression.
what the standard of the Belgian Armed Forces is. Some years ago in the TA I did an exercise with Belgian Marines, and half of them were conscripts, and they had long hair kept up with hairnets.
I think they've got a bit smarter now.
Yeah.
Short hair is in general, so I think they're a bit smarter. But what I think this bit shows is that the policy isn't just David Cameron talking. They are mobilising forces in NATO. And while we may joke a little bit at the size of the Belgian armed forces, I think UK is going to be fairly similar to them.
I recall your previous theory that you put forward. It's all to do with harmonising European armed forces. Yeah. Of course, to do that, you need a threat, don't you? So problem, reaction, solution, perhaps.
I think it could well be. Well, let's add a bit more, because of course it isn't only small countries like Belgium that are now rattling the sabre against Russia. We've got Norway included, and thank you again for the same gentleman that sent us this piece of information. So it's come from the Norwegian government's own website, joint statement by the German, Polish, Dutch and Norwegian Ministers of Defence. This was on the 18th of June. We're very pleased to be cooperating closely in the interim Very High Readiness Joint Task Force for 2015, a spearhead and a rapidly deployable force. We're now developing the capability of responding quickly to any emerging threats to NATO, and we're very happy to be here at Exercise Noble Jump today to see progress being made. This exercise contributes to long-term adaptation of NATO that was launched in Wales and will continue beyond the Warsaw Summit. Now, I've read that sentence several times and I'm very curious as to what it really means. This exercise contributes to long-term adaptation of NATO that was launched in Wales. What I think it's saying is that this is part of the policy that was put together during that big NATO summit in Wales. And let's, of course, remember the public were kept well away by fences and armed policemen while NATO did its stuff in South Wales. David Cameron then set about further massive cuts to the British Armed Forces, whilst at the same time standing on the world stage and threatening almost to go to war with Russia. So there appears to be cognitive dissonance, confusion, deliberate confusion in the policy being put forward by David Cameron and his Conservative government. Let's remind ourselves of this man, dragged out with his carpet slippers fairly recently. It's George Osborne's dad-in-law, and he said that American generals are quite wrong when they say Britain is in retreat. It's nonsense. And according to this wise man, defence cuts are actually good for Britain's defences.
The worst thing I think they've done recently, I mentioned before, they've gone to just-in-time supplies, which means there's always a lag and it's always vulnerable to interference. And professionals talk logistics, haven't we? We've said that before. Yeah. If we haven't got the logistic tail, it doesn't matter how many troops we've got, and that's what they appear to be cutting first.
Yeah. So either we're talking about politicians who are simply incompetent fools, and I don't believe that, or we've got something else going on here, which is we're essentially playing mind games with the public, which is how we've just labelled this Telegraph article, defence cuts are good for defence. Well, of course, utter nonsense, no common sense. So something else is going on here. These people. It
begins with letter T, doesn't it?
Go ahead.
Treason.
Yeah. Well, we'll come on to that in a bit more detail.
The common law rule is treason is killing the sovereign or killing her in the legal sense, and killing, reducing her ability to defend the kingdom has been held. It's treason. It really is as simple as that. So it reaches a point where the word's got to be used and something's got to be done. And
I think we're quite happy to use the word. Mm-hmm. Well, let's have a look at the other thing that's taking place at the moment within Europe's defences and NATO. And this is the rise of the female defence minister. Now, no doubt a few hackles will go out from some of the ladies out there, but we're going to try and think this one through. The Guardian here with a usual, I'm going to call it upbeat left-wing article, female defence ministers pledge to break Europe's old boys network. So let's have a look. We've got Sweden, Norway, Netherlands and Germany all together there. These are the girls. And essentially, as the ladies are coming up to head defence, we've also, surprise, surprise, got the rhetoric for a war with Russia being ramped up. So the article is interesting because it's suggesting that what we need to calm things down in the world is more women connected to defence. On the other hand, they're coming in at a time when we're clearly seeing the rhetoric for violence and war in Europe increasing. I'm calling them the place men of the glass ceiling. These ladies apparently reckon that because they've become respective defence ministers of their country, they're going to break through the glass ceiling. Well, I thought we'd just put them where they really are. And of course, this will lead us on nicely to your topic, but we've got the corrupt international banking cartels. I thought maybe Mr. Soros might be good to have somewhere near the top. And the lovely Christine. These are the people pulling the strings on the international politicians. Where are these ladies? Well, these are simply parts of the puppet show controlled by the very glass ceiling they think they're about to break through. So utter corruption by the banks, and ultimately, of course, the banks are the people who are going to make profit out of war.
Funding
violence.
both sides, traditionally.
Yeah, funding both sides. And we just mentioned Greece, of course, because the dialogue goes on, the so-called ultimatum. At the moment, the Greeks don't appear to be giving in to what many people would regard to be blackmail over their loans. We've got Greece's Prime Minister here arriving at the EU Commission headquarters, and we're told that there's still very tough discussions going on. But we could solve all of this overnight by bringing a bit of truth and honesty into banking, and of course getting rid of the scam of money created from nothing. So how are things going in the courts?
Well, the Northern Ireland courts are separate, but the majority of legislation applies both over the water, as they say, or on the mainland, as another way of describing it. For those that follow my work, I'm a big fan of the website called legislation.gov.uk. So when you look at an Act of Parliament, there's a button to say where does it apply, jurisdiction. So I've learnt my lesson. The Bill of Rights doesn't apply in Northern Ireland. I was amazed, but we're challenging that one. Magna Carta does. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw your attention to an article which is going to be posted very shortly. It was, I apologise, it was lost in cyberspace. That's why it hasn't been posted earlier, but it's been relocated. I wrote it on Monday. It's called Capitalisation, Securitisation and Fraud by Mortgage Lenders. And basically there have been two court cases. One is complete and there's a judgment on it, and the other is part way through, and we're looking forward to the judgment. So the one that's more or less complete is Bank of Scotland versus REA, I beg your pardon, spelled REA. There'll be a link in the article to it. It's to do with criminal fraud, and this is how it was reported in the legal press. Bank of Scotland has vowed to challenge a legal verdict in Northern Ireland, which ruled it treated mortgage borrowers in arrears in an unconscionable way by double billing them for missed repayments. Well, if you actually read the judgment, it's a guide how to spot whether you've been ill-treated by your mortgage lender. As I mentioned the other day, it's very similar to the concept of the social workers taking the least favourable approach to every case to get what they want, which is to seize children. So have a read of it. I hope you got the message to send off for a Freedom of Information subject access request, so you've got the documents to work from. And we'll circulate a list of the codes for the transactions that you see in the printouts, many pages that will come. Just be sure to ask for all material that you've got, because if they try and conceal anything, then that's a fraud. It's fraud by misrepresentation, and because we've got the text of standard conditions which Santander and Bank of Scotland use, we'll be able to spot that, and aim to expand our work to other dealers, other mortgage suppliers as well. The bottom line is, as I mentioned earlier, you agree to borrow money and pay it back, and you accept the implication of penalties if anything goes wrong, but the two should be kept separate, and adding one to the other is fraud, and that's what creates the mathematically certain exponential rise in payments, which causes a large proportion of people who take out mortgages to fail. And of course the other side want that, because they get more money out of a failure than they do out of a completion. So even if your mortgage sometime in the past, I would argue certainly that because fraud was involved, there's no time limit, and you may be entitled to claim excess interest that's been paid back. I won't make promises beyond my power, as I say, but that's my understanding at the present time. And the second case, the Mr. A case, that talks about securitisation. You may be entitled to the full amount you've been paid back, and the reason is that you may have wondered why a repayment mortgage is called a repayment mortgage. Well, Mr. A's documents demonstrate that 3 months after, in his case, 3 years after he took out the initial mortgage, it was sold and his account was credited with the full amount he borrowed. So it went to zero. And then later the same day, it was knocked up again to the same figure as it was before. And as you know, the common law principle is that a mortgage paid is a debt paid is a debt expunged. And there's no contract with a second person to repay it. In actual fact, repayment means pay twice. That's because the promissory note that you sign when you take out the loan agreement is the first payment, and what you pay back is repayment. So the company gets twice the amount plus all this interest for capitalisation. So 2.5, 3 times.
So massive fraud, John, which has been perpetuated on millions of people in UK and presumably overseas. The same scandal working overseas.
It's by definition, you who are watching this programme are awake. Otherwise, you wouldn't bother, would you? I'm sure you've had the problem that I've had of my family aren't. It's not uncommon, but here's a common cause, isn't it? So watch this space. It could well be you've got something to attract the attention of others, and then wake them up to the big picture. So don't don't be shy about mentioning money. It could be that this is a hook to wake people up to the general situation. There's a parasitic class that's clamped itself around our throats for many years, and now we can see them, as I've said before. And when we can see them, then power goes. At the end of the day, hopefully these blights will be put in front of a jury of their peers, which will be us, whether a grand jury or a petit jury, and that's the body they're going to have to answer to. They use Talmudic logic. Talmudic logic is the principle that if everybody agrees on something, it must be true. I heard a Red Ice radio programme some months ago, and they were talking about schools of psychology. Freud, for example. Freud wrote a paper, circulated amongst his psychiatrist colleagues, most of whom were Jewish as it happens, and they all agreed that was correct, and that was it. Then Freud's theory became prominent. It's in contrast to the scientific method, which is you observe the fact, propose a theory, write a paper, and then have it peer reviewed. There's no need for peer review in Talmudic logic, because if everybody agrees, everybody agrees.
That is very interesting, John. I just noticed here in this text that you kindly provided, it says here that the Bank of England's first quarterly report of 2014 openly admits that, quote, in modern banking practices, the creation of money is not how it is perceived in existing textbooks or how it's currently taught in universities. So
that's the significance, because Mr. A's subpoenaing, if that's the right word in the civil court, requiring those people from the Bank of England to come to court and give evidence, so they can be cross-examined. So there can be no doubt whatsoever that they're telling the truth.
Yeah. So as you say, it is now coming to the surface that what we're dealing with is this massive international monetary corruption. And where are the wars being funded for? Well, money created by nothing, which makes life easy for them.
We understand when a mortgage that is securitised, then that's used for fractional reserve banking and multiplied. So the derivative bubble is largely based on that, is my understanding. So it could undermine that as well. Which is
so if as a rounding up comment on this, what would you hope people to be doing to be able to use this information to push their own cases?
Subscribe to the UK column. Well, you already are if you're watching this, I dare say. It takes time to get your subject access requests in your Freedom Act reports. They've got up to 40 days. They can charge a tenner. And I'll undertake by the end of the month to have a report on how to interpret what you've got. And once we can interpret what you've got, then the next phase will be to write to the person that sold you the loan. The claim for a civil procedure, as you probably know, is first it's a letter before claim to explain what the issue is, and the letter before claim hopefully will be something that the other side really can't answer. Then all we need is one test case, and it'll either be Mr. A's at the end of the month, end of September, or it'll be one on the mainland, and then you've got your next missold mortgages scandal.
And of course, it runs into billions of pounds. So this is vast. If we have a look at the scam across the country.
It won't bring the country down because, as you know, the UK column supports lawful money, Bradbury Pound, so it might be the tipping point for that as well. So the big picture is we go from personal interest in having been cheated to spreading the word to people that aren't awake but ought to be, to putting the country to rights.
Excellent. Well, can we trust our politicians to sort things out? We thought for a little recap of no, of course not. Let's have a look at Mr. Rifkin as just one example. But it wasn't so long ago that Mr. Rifkin was in the media, cash for access, Rifkin and straw as well, actions are the norm in Parliament. So here is the reality. We can't trust our own politicians because they're not trustworthy people. And it's not just politics.co that's been saying this. We have a look. Other people have been picking up on this. The inset there was simply showing that we had trustworthy people like Mr. Rifkin heading up our intelligence committee. So the security of Britain in his hands, along with formerly William Hague. And we'd pointed out in that little diagram that, of course, David Cameron's loyalty was declared not to the British people, but to Israel. Well, The Guardian took it further because they'd got a quote here about Mr. Rifkin for the chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee to discuss working for a bogus Chinese company is very odd indeed. To be frank, I can't believe ISC members are allowed outside interests. They see more sensitive information than most government ministers. So some concern there from Tom. And we've also got, of course, David Cameron making backdoor deals with the Chinese. We're told in one breath that the Chinese are still a country drastically lacking human rights. And, of course, with a communist core, which is still there, David Cameron busy selling off Britain's strategic infrastructure to them. And then we've got the likes of Leon Britton, deceased, cousin of Malcolm Rifkin, a man, many questions being asked around him, but never actually pinned down. But we don't have to go too deep, do we, John, to see that basically Britain is now being governed by people who are simply... well, what are they? Liars and cheats, I suppose.
They're blackmail material at the very least, aren't they? Which should be fatal qualification for a politician, shouldn't it? You and I passed security vetting, haven't we? For good reason, and these people have never passed, would they? Well,
or else the people controlling the vetting process say, let's let our boys through.
Yes, yeah.
Well, we can follow this through because let's bring in Alison Saunders, and here she is in the Telegraph. She's now calmly saying that her decision that Mr. Janner could not be prosecuted, well, that could actually possibly be reversed, she says. And this comes after Miss Saunders actually said to 9 alleged victims that a police investigation had gathered enough evidence to charge Janner with 22 offences of paedophilia. But she said he'd never stand trial because of his mental capacity. Now, let's remember that this lady actually consulted a barrister who just happened to be a friend within the same chambers as the son of Lord Janner. Well, a little bit of confusion possibly by this lady. But let's also remember that if she couldn't prosecute Lord Janner because of his mental health, it's remarkable that she was able to prosecute Melanie Shaw, who of course was suffering from PTSD from her abuse as a child, and this lady has also needed psychiatric support for many years. So Alison Saunders can prosecute her without any trouble at all, but Lord Janner's a bit of a problem. I don't know whether we get a clue for this, but we just did happen to notice the nice little pentagram brooch that Miss Saunders was wearing. I'm sure she thinks it's quite attractive, but I wonder whether she's flashing her true credentials in front of us. What do you make of this extraordinary case?
The current generation of policemen have inherited a mess for which my generation is responsible, although nobody ever did it in front of me. They would have paid the price. and we're waiting for them to step forward. And we've got reason to believe there are factions, and we're waiting to see who comes out on top.
There's a battle going on within the police, that's absolutely true. Are some of Britain's policemen and women watching today? We certainly hope so. We'll remind ourselves again that even the BBC knew what the problem was, and here was their remarkable interview with Tim Fortescue, Conservative Party whip, 1970-73. And in this interview, please watch it if you haven't seen it, he casually says we would solve their problems. He's talking about the problems of members of Parliament. And those problems, well, they could be small boys, it could be money, could be a variety of things. And we solve the problems because then they would do as we asked. So he's simply saying that the Tory whips knew that the paedophilia was going on, but they actually quite liked it, because it meant they could blackmail politicians to do their bidding.
Politicians generate acts of parliament, don't they? So the question is, the validity of many acts of parliament is in doubt, isn't it? Because of these people. The courts for many years have had a policy, and it's only a policy, of not challenging the validity of acts of parliament. They will say if it's published by Parliament, we'll accept it, and we don't ask. And they in fact rely on the Bill of Rights, and they say the article of the Bill of Rights says debates in Parliament shall be free. Well, it only says the debates shall be free. It doesn't say what goes on that leads up to the debates. So the fallout from all this could well be a number of acts of Parliament are deemed not to be acts of Parliament. There's a logical fallacy by the courts at the moment, because if they look at something and they've got a policy of saying, well, we won't challenge the validity of act of Parliament. If they look at something that's invalid, well, it's not an act of Parliament. So they're not challenging it. It's just not an act of Parliament, and that's the step we've got to get them over. And like anything else, it needs test cases. So we're working on that.
We've got to keep pushing. Well, the police coming under attack, even if our politicians seem to be protected at the moment. It's quite noticeable, the number of cases now where policemen are being picked up. This is misconduct in public office. It's an Essex case, and we've got 6 Essex police officers facing criminal inquiry, a criminal inquiry over their failure to deal with child abuse complaints. So it says that 6 of the officers are also facing a criminal investigation for these alleged offences, including misconduct in public office and perverting the course of justice. Now, UK Column says this is exactly what was going on amongst Thames Valley Police when they were helping Oxford City Council cover up abuse at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. We've now got it in Essex. We've seen this in other parts of the country. On one hand, I personally think we need to root out the policemen and women who aren't doing their jobs, but it also seems to me that the Crown Prosecution Service is very happy to focus on crimes inside the police, because that deflects, of course, from the troubles with politicians who've been naughty boys and girls.
Well, the good news is there's a recent statute, and I've got an article to hand over to Brian later today. It's the Courts Act 2015, a new offence of police corruption. When a new Act of Parliament comes out, you have to wait until the courts actually use it to definitively determine what its effect is. But there's an impact statement which I've discovered for this particular measure, and it's specifically intended to make it easier to prosecute for offences of misconduct in office, because one of the elements of misconduct in office is it's so bad it would outrage public opinion. And the CPS uses that as an excuse. They look at misconduct and they say, we can't get over this, it's so bad it will outrage public opinion. So the new Act is specifically designed to get around that, and I'll explain it in my article, so have a look later. And it came into force, I think it was February this year. So it would apply to conduct now, even though it relates to things in the past, if you see what I mean. Yeah. Because if somebody's still concealing stuff, or somebody knows that stuff is being concealed, it's being done now, and I would argue you could use this Act as a tool to smarten them up. The Federation seems to be asleep at the wheel and hasn't circulated any training on this to the policemen I've spoken to, and the ones that have are horrified because it means they're fully exposed. And what the Act says is known or ought to have known that they were doing a wrong thing, and the standard of the wrong thing is the reasonable member of the public test.
Right.
Otherwise known as Wensbury reasonableness, which I'll explain in the article. So there is a new tool to invoke, and the only downside is misconduct in office, life imprisonment. New offence is 14 years, but there we go. That'll do. That should be sufficient to get their attention.
Well, it's a start, and I might as well bring this one up on screen, because another case. This is Met police have been arrested over alleged corrupt links to businessmen. This seems to be something to do with licensing. What do you think the inference is here? Drinking after hours or possibly?
I couldn't possibly comment. Licensing unit means alcohol licensing, so certainly in Westminster, but it's also more serious sex clubs and things like that. So we'll have to wait and see. It's not unknown for policemen to accept alcohol. I didn't because I don't drink, but in the past. But it could be more serious than that, so we'll have to see.
Okay, well, let's leave the police alone for the moment and jump back onto Britain's highly questionable politicians. And I think Nick Clegg wins the prize for sheer hypocrisy because he's now trying to say that the Tories want to hide the effects of their new policies on child poverty. Nick Clegg, who of course ran away from the subject of child abuse, certainly ran away from Bill Maloney, who challenged him over what he was going to do to stop institutional child abuse. He's then decimated his own party. Now he's blaming the Tories over the policies on child poverty, but presumably the Lib Dems helped to create those policies in the first place. I don't want to say any more because I think I'll get myself into trouble, but these people are despicable.
Yes, because they'd have to get to the top in politics. I'm minded to refer to the demonstration over cuts in disability payments. There's a demonstration that actually got into the central lobby of Parliament and more or less got into the chamber, I think, because the policemen are handicapped because how do you deal with somebody who's in a wheelchair? So one of the concepts I've got in mind for our members is that there are protest movements going on up and down the land about cuts, whether it's schools or toilets. In my case, in my county, if the toilets close, coaches don't stop. If the coaches don't stop, the town centre loses trade, for example. Could I suggest that you bring the Bradbury Pound to the attention of any protest movement in your area, because you'll find there are like-minded people who are partially awake and need that little final step. Do you know you've been cheated financially? You can tell them they might be able to make a mortgage claim. You can tell them they might be able to withhold council tax. But anybody who's sufficiently motivated to actually be in a campaign potentially is a recruit, aren't they? So could I suggest you join, go to the meeting and stand up and say, "Oh, have you heard about the Bradbury Pound?" and tell them. It really is as simple as that.
Brilliant. Well, let's have a quick advert for UK Column itself. We're delighted with the response that we've got to the new website. So well done, Mike Robinson. Thank you, everybody that's taken the trouble to email us or call us. Not only to thank Mike in particular for putting that website together, but also to tell us where there have been a few little glitches. Those are being dealt with. But here's a bit more that's been added. We've got material now being made available in SoundCloud, so you can have a look at that. And also what we're doing is also now going up to, and being made available in iTunes. So many people have said to us that audio is good, and of course it means people can be listening to this while they're travelling in the car. So if you haven't had a look at that side of UK Column website, please do. Well, we're looking out the window and we're simply watching the United Kingdom being dismantled in front of our very eyes. It seems to be becoming more and more obvious, and recognising it and seeing the state of advancement means that we need to get geared up to do something about it. Let's just have a look at the Telegraph here, which is busy pointing out that the Queen's been popping over to Europe for a banquet in Berlin where she gave a speech, and this is going to be all about unity in Europe. Well, we thought this was probably a fine setting because, of course, it was only a few years ago that the same Duke of Edinburgh and royal family were actually supporting the Nazi version of a united Europe. So something pretty despicable going on here. What can people do about this? Well, let's remember very brave John Harris, because John Harris, with a little help from the UK Column, was the man who first exposed that the Queen had in fact accepted mediatisation. So she was happy to give away her power sovereign power within this nation state. She was happy to give that away to the European Union in order to keep the money. This is treason, John, isn't it?
Well, yeah, again, the T word. What the late, great John Harris is doing there is he's declaring diffidatio. I refer you to my video on YouTube, Magna Carta, the rescue, and the bit about diffidatio. Allegiance isn't for life if the other side breaks the contract. And of course, we could argue that Elizabeth Saxe-Coburg-Gotha has when she accepted mediatisation, which is in post but not in office. And basically, you're required to declare publicly you withdraw your allegiance, and perhaps put it in writing, and that's what he's doing. If you were to look at the TUPC website from a few years ago, you'll find an account of it. If you look at the Magna Carta Society blog, you'll find an account of how it was done in 2001. And Brian brought my attention to the fact that the Scottish government is ducking and diving over paying to the civil list, the funding for the Queen in Scotland. Well, my advice to them, if they're watching, is, well, if you want to do that, you do what the barons did in May 1215. You go and see a vicar and swear that you're withdrawing allegiance, because otherwise you're a traitor. If not, if you withdraw allegiance, you're an adversary in the military sense. Title to the crown is settled by trial by battle. So hopefully you won't get to the battle, but there is a procedure for withdrawing your allegiance, and it's well established. And as ever, I quote textbooks. So if you look at my article, you'll find a quote from Blackstone's commentaries on the laws of England, the king and his right to his title.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, here's David Cameron. We've shown this before, but let's think about this again. We said the forked tongue of a dangerous and duplicitous David Cameron. He was giving statements, of course, talking about one nation, one United Kingdom. But while he was talking about one nation and one United Kingdom, he was also saying that he wanted to implement devolution as fast as he could. And the aim of all that was to reshape the future of the United Kingdom itself. So did we agree to this? Well, I don't think we did, but David Cameron is basically smashing the United Kingdom to pieces for his own objective in order to create one nation, our nation. I personally think that's the banking nation, but maybe we could have a discussion on that another time. So let's bring ourselves up to date because the Express here says outrage over David Cameron's rebranding of the EU membership in order to win over Eurosceptics. This is a common little tactic, isn't it? That if you don't get your way, you describe the whole thing as something completely different in the hope of confusing people. Well, we maintain this is one of the most dangerous prime ministers this country's ever had. He's prepared to rebrand EU membership. He's also prepared to remove information in order to deceive the public. And no apologies for showing this little cartoon concoction again, because we equated David Cameron to Kim Jong-un from North Korea, because both of these men had openly censored the truth by removing information about their activities from the internet. So North Korea, dictatorship, David Cameron's Conservative Britain, also a dictatorship, where David Cameron and his fellow politicians prepared to simply lie and deceive the public. Well, it goes deeper because, of course, Cameron is about to be discussing with the European Union changes to Britain's membership. So the Guardian here, EU referendum, Cameron in uncharted territory as he lays out UK demands. I thought, John, it was a classic Guardian picture showing the imposing...
He's much taller, isn't he? Yeah.
Yes, he looks a bit like the public school tutor telling the little boys off.
Yep.
This is what he was actually saying. If you do not give me what I need, I will implicitly or explicitly tell the leaders the EU's third biggest country may quit. That's not our wording. That's the wording from the Guardian article. But also in that article, a continental politician said this: David Cameron's strategic approach is not to come up with specific things. So people the other side of the water are clearly seeing that Cameron is prepared to twist the truth and lie. We don't want to discuss anything specific like leaving a corrupt European Union we're going to keep the debate spinning. That's where I think he's going.
Well, he can't be pinned down if he's never committed himself.
This is true. And that's actually what the Continental politician went on to say, that that was probably what he didn't want to do, is ever be pinned down. Well, if you're of a weak disposition, look away. It's not Tony Blair, but it's still pretty interesting. This is Telegraph, and this is the subject that you mentioned, John. Nicola Sturgeon would be a fool to break up the royal love affair with Scotland. And basically, the Scots are now saying they're going to take over Crown Estate north of the border, and they don't like having to pay for the Queen. Well, let's remember this has popped up just a couple of months after David Cameron was up there squeezing the flesh of Ms. Sturgeon and promising that he would give her more or less everything she wanted. I noticed she's in a nice little illuminated red dress there, so I think there was a bit of significance to that black door red dress pose. But we should label this treason again, I think.
Well, once you've withdrawn your allegiance officially, then it's not. That's the point of diffidatio, isn't it? In early times, religious oaths were the foundation of society, essentially.
Yeah.
It was the only test was if you swore it. Prior to jury trial, and in fact, it was trial by if you can get 3 men to swear that you're a good bloke, you couldn't possibly have done it. That was sufficient because people thought they'd go to hell forever if they lied. That's how seriously oaths were taken. The Scottish on a trajectory, in actual fact, one of the early acts of Mr. Blair was to allow Scotsmen a loyal title to their land. So in England, it's all owned by the Crown. So even though you pay your mortgage and buy a piece of land, you never own it. In Scotland, it's different. So that's a logical progression.
John, I'll ask you this question. We haven't got much time left, but we'll just see what your initial answer is, and that is that it seems to me that Scotland is becoming a significant centre of power.
Well, it always has been, because the Scottish Rite Freemasonry originates there. It does it as it says on the tin. So in the same way, Switzerland has its own armed militia to defend the country. Scotland's got it. The armed policeman business. The people at the top of the food chain need a physical base to live and to protect themselves, and it's going towards that, isn't it?
So, so you're saying real significance of this new Scottish model of government, which of course David Scott has been talking about, warning us about, where we see what is essentially a police state emerging in Scotland.
It fits the definition, doesn't it? So the police, there's only one police force. Whoever you complain about, they'll investigate it. The issue about arming a large proportion of the force, again, is an indicator, isn't it? It's a warning sign.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for that. Well, if you're feeling a bit gloomy, don't be, because the truth's got to come out before we can actually deal with the problem. So exposure is a very good thing. But how can we give you a little look at how we should be doing things? Well, we've done it like this. I'm going to say the other side love using the dandelion seeds floating off in the air, because this is their, they use this as their image of how they can corrupt things. But I think basically we are using the same system. So we're setting seeds all over the country. But what should we be dealing in? Well, we should be dealing in these things. We should be dealing in law and order, common law, the Constitution, truth, love, happiness, compassion, courage, honesty, unity, opportunity, community, families, morality, and from my point of view, God. So if you're thinking what you do doesn't have an effect because it's so small, just think of your activities on the right side as setting a seed. And dandelion seeds, of course, are very, very tiny, but rapidly grow into a plant that's well entrenched and very difficult to remove.
And what's in the headline news now was only us talking about 3 years ago, wasn't it? I remember you made a strategic decision, but the child molesting issue was at the heart of things, and of course you've been proved right. So.
Yes, unfortunately, but once we understand the blackmail of our politicians, we can see how the other side's controlled. I think that's about it. John, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for watching and listening. We will be back at the same time tomorrow, 1 o'clock. If you like what the UK column is doing, and you haven't already done so, please consider taking out a subscription, making a donation, or perhaps you might like to buy from our shop. We still have quite a few free Melanie Shaw t-shirts. We think they are still of great value, because is Melanie Shaw free? Well, she's out of prison, but within the corrupt British system of so-called child care, Melanie is still not free. So if you think you can manage one of those t-shirts to support her and other child abuse survivors, please get in touch. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.